Welcome to Politics and Psychology. I'm Dr. Renee Carr, your host, and on this podcast, we discuss psychological insights for our country's social issues, sensitive topics, and controversial conversations. Today, we are discussing the January 2024 video that was released by Planned Parenthood, in which they stated that virginity is a social construct. And because Planned Parenthood provides over 90% of their services as medical or healthcare related, let's examine if what they're promoting on social media messaging is indeed a medical or accurate statement. Before we do that, I do have for you 3 clips from that video. So let's listen to those now.
Let me cut to the chase. Virginity is a completely made-up concept. It's a term that was created simply to control and shame people, mainly women. Another reason the idea of virginity is complete nonsense is that sex means different things to different people. That's the beauty of your sexual journey. You're in charge and you can figure it out on your own terms. Choosing to have sex, when, what kind, where, who with, is something that only you get to define.
In the first clip, we hear her saying that virginity is a made-up concept. She later goes on to say that it's not medically real. However, she also adds that it doesn't quote-unquote apply to queer people, but the word queer in itself is a made-up term. So it is true that virginity is not a medical term, but it is a social understanding of an individual who has no sexual history. In the 3-minute video, she also says that virginity is complete nonsense. And in the YouTube description of that video, it says that virginity is whack. So they're earlier saying that virginity is being used to shame individuals who do choose to have sex, but they're using language of nonsense as whack to actually shame individuals who don't choose to engage in sex or who do choose to remain virgins. Toward the end of the video, she states that you don't lose anything by having sex for the first time. You don't lose your virginity. You actually gain something, that you gain sexual empowerment, self-insight, and also sexual intimacy. And the third clip, which you heard, which was how she ended the video, by saying that sex means different things to different people. The problem with the messaging that Planned Parenthood is putting out is that their primary audience are adolescents, maybe individuals who might be 11 and 12 years old, but they're young individuals who are under the age of 18, who don't even understand their bodies, much less having their bodies being used in a sexual way, whether they're initiating it or not. And when you also add in language such as sex means different things to different people, and that you don't lose anything by having sex for the first time, but that you gain something, they are creating a distorted view of what sexuality is and also encouraging risky behaviors. Not having accurate information about human sexuality, sex behaviors, and human reproduction are the primary causes of teenage pregnancies and also teenage STDs or sexual infections. It's also one of the primary reasons that individuals who are being groomed sexually don't recognize that they are being groomed because they don't have accurate information to say that this is or is not wanted or this is or is not appropriate. So now let's examine the consequences of having sex as a child or adolescent. So in research terms, we define childhood between the ages of 0 and 9, and adolescence is the time period between 10 years of age and 19. So when children are having sex, it's often traumatizing, it's confusing, and it will often alter their personalities. And the primary reason is because their bodies nor their minds were psychologically or biologically ready for sexual behaviors. And because of that, it leads to them having a higher rate of substance abuse, promiscuity, anger and aggression. It also makes them more likely to be the victim of not one rape, but multiple rapes. And the reason for this is when a child is told that having sex before they're an adult, that it's good, that it's right, that it's, as Planned Parenthood would tell you, it's doing whatever feels right whenever it feels right to you. by them misinforming individuals that sex can be anything to anyone at any time. When children are encountered in a sexual situation, their bodies know and their minds know that this is not something that they are ready to be able to handle. And because of that, it can lead either to trauma, such as PTSD, or on a milder sense, it leads to them no longer being able to trust themselves to know if their body is giving out positive, safe signals or if any individual around them is a threat. So, for that reason, they learn to mistrust themselves and mistrust their bodies. And then, when you have situations where a potential rapist is attacking them or a potential perpetrator is grooming them, they are not able to recognize the signals because they have been told that this was a good thing. But on a subconscious level, they knew that it was not a good thing. But because their body is telling them that it's not good, their mind is telling them it's not good, but the outside information is telling them that it is good, they grow up believing that they cannot trust their minds to make a decision of what's good for them or what's safe for them. And therefore, they are more likely to put themselves in relationships or in situations that are unsafe or dangerous and can lead them to being victims of rape, sexual exploitation, or sexual abuse. In adolescence, and remember for research purposes, adolescents are humans between the ages of 10 and 19 years of age. So when adolescents initiate sexual activity rather than being forced to or agreeing to, when adolescents initiate sexual activity, they are significantly more likely to have anxiety, depression, and suicidal thinking and suicidal attempts. And when you look at female adolescents, they are at an even higher risk of having these emotional experiences. And for both male and female adolescents who engage in sexual activities, they are also more likely to abuse substances, more likely to have STDs or sexually transmitted diseases and infections, and higher risk for early pregnancies. In addition to data showing us the psychological consequences of when adolescents engage in sexual intercourse, there are also studies that give us varying degrees of adolescent sexual behaviors and the consequences of those. For example, the Millennium Cohort study analyzed the sexual behaviors of adolescents in 5 categories. They studied 5,593 boys and 5,724 girls. And the 5 categories were 1, no sexual behavior, 2, kisser only, 3, touching under clothes, 4, genital touching, and 5, all sexual activities. Of these adolescents, 50.74% categorized themselves as virgins or as having no sexual history, and the other 49.26% categorized themselves as having some level of sexual activity, whether it was low intensity such as kissing or higher intensity such as category 5, which was all sexual activities. Of those adolescents who engaged in some form of sexual activity, they also had increasingly higher percentages of substance abuse, depression, and suicidal behaviors. The data that I'm sharing with you today is just a sampling of the preponderance of data showing the psychological consequences that occur when adolescents engage in sexual activity. And when comparing data with adolescent virgins, the sexually active adolescents are also more likely to have reproductive health consequences, poor academic performance consequences, and also more likely to abuse and have longer term challenges with substance use and addiction. So again, contrary to the video that Planned Parenthood is promoting, saying that you don't lose anything when you lose virginity, there are significant losses when adolescents do lose their virginity, and there is little data showing that there is any benefit to them. Now, there is some truth to the video stating that virginity and sexuality is a social construct. So no, the virginity part is not a social construct. Either you are or you are not a virgin. However, sexuality does have cultural influences and therefore could be considered a social construct. And what I mean by that is, first, sexuality is physiological, biological, and psychological. And the psychological part is where the arousal will then be initiated. So, if one culture finds large ears, for example, to be attractive, then what that culture finds attractive, then the individuals within that culture will then find larger ears more attractive. And the more attractiveness they see in that ear, that ear size, and the more sexual arousal they are more likely to experience. So, that's just one example of cultural influences. And that's mainly because of the mind, and then the mind is influenced by social beliefs of attractiveness, and then that leading to the arousal. So, when you think about that, let's look at and compare the different cultural differences on not only what is arousing, but what is arousal behavior. Let's start with our country, America. So, in America and many of the Western societies, we often view kissing on the mouth as a form of sexual initiation and sexual foreplay. But in many other parts of the world, it's not only not done, but it's also seen as something that's very gross or inappropriate. For example, the Hindu people of India do not kiss on the lips because they believe that kissing on the lips symbolically contaminates the act of sexual intercourse. We also have North American Inuit people. They don't kiss on the lips, but instead they rub their noses. Also, in America and other Western societies, you'll see oral sex behavior used as a way of sexual arousal as well as sexual pleasure. But you won't see that in the southern regions of Africa. If you look at the tantric tradition, you'll see another example of how culture influences sexuality and the definition of what is sexual pleasure. So, in the Eastern tantric traditions, where we in America focus on a very little amount of foreplay and a huge focus on the orgasm. In their traditions, they focus more on the sensual and spiritual aspects of their shared intimacy, with orgasm being like the cherry on top as a side benefit and not the main focus. And in another example, in America, the bare female breasts are often viewed as a source of erotic and sexual stimuli, but in many other countries and in societies, bare breasts are not arousing. So the Planned Parenthood video's reference to sexuality being a social construct, that would be true. And it would also be true that there is a gender bias on the promotion of women being virgins, but not men. But that's the only two truths that the video actually discusses. The rest are what they're making up to actually support the Planned Parenthood agenda. And the reason why I say an agenda is because Planned Parenthood has 90% of their services based off of medical or healthcare, and medical and healthcare based off of adolescent or young adult sexuality. And there may be some older adults there, but it's mainly younger individuals. And so, if they can encourage adolescents to not only engage in sex, but to engage in sex early and often, therefore, they're more likely to have an STD, to have mental health consequences, or to need pregnancy care or abortion care. Those are all services that Planned Parenthood provides. So their messaging is consistent with any other corporate messaging to get you to buy their product or to support and buy their services. So their messaging is not based off of the true care of the adolescents coming to them, but actually giving them misinformation to encourage those youth to engage in the risky behaviors that will result in a financial benefit to Planned Parenthood. And rather than promoting adolescent virginity or abstaining from sex, they instead promote them going on a sexual journey where they will just figure it out, and then they'll help you deal with the negative consequences that occur from that sexual journey.
That's the beauty of your sexual journey. You're in charge, and you can figure it out on your own terms.
So that was the third clip and also the concluding sentence for the Planned Parenthood video. And the reason why we're discussing this video today, or even the topic of is virginity a social construct or a social concept, is because in our modern society, there has been such a heavy promotion on high sexuality and sexual freedom. And it's put in messaging and in the guise of this is for sexual freedom, sexual rights, and for female empowerment. But what it really is the deliberate misinformation so that the individuals who are falling for this message can then be exploited not for their own health benefits or true psychological, social, or self empowerment, but instead for the financial gain of the agencies or the entities that are pushing this